back to this idea of explicit instruction. We're going to work on summarizing. Here is a Freyer model for that. We have our dictionary definition, a comprehensive and usually brief abstract recapitulation or compendium of previously stated facts or statements. This is a really thick definition, and this is something that sometimes happens when we're dealing with dictionaries. We end up going on a chase through the dictionary looking for words that were in the definition that we don't know, and then by the time kids get to the end, they don't have any idea what they started out looking up. So we stuck this in here because, again, this to kind of demonstrate the little bit of a challenge with dictionaries. This particular definition came from the same place as the definition for quotation and for paraphrasing, same dictionary for all three. So be a little bit careful and use something like this Freyer model to provide kids with the what it is, student-friendly definition there in the bottom left corner. So an example of a summary: Clara, a slave on a southern plantation, collects bits of fabric to help her make a map to freedom. She and her friend Jack use the map to escape to a new life. That's a summary of the book Sweet Clara and the Freedom Quilt by Deborah Hopkinson. What it is not quoting, and it is not paraphrasing. We're going to take a second to look at some summaries that were written by students, and I know that you have not read the text that these are coming from, so I'm going to ask you to make some judgment calls about these summaries. Which do you think is better, just based on your professional opinion? Take a minute just to read these and decide which do you think is the better summary, number 1 or number 2. In this example, number 1 is the better summary. Number 1 provides more of an overview. Summaries are designed to be more of an overview rather than getting into specific details. Number 2 includes specific details like the number of students in the choir and things of that nature. So number 1, because it is more general and more of an overview, is considered a better summary. Take a look at these summaries. In this example, number 2 is considered the better summary. In number 2, there's some closure that number 1 is missing. While the language is very similar and very much the same, number 2 has more closure to it than number 1 does. So number 2 is considered a better summary sample. So we've defined summaries and we've looked at some examples of summaries, and we're going to talk now about some strategies for practicing summaries. The task of summarizing is very difficult, and it's something that even adults are still learning how to do. So we want to have lots of opportunities to practice summarizing, and maybe not necessarily write a full essay every time, and maybe not write a full paper every time, but spend some time talking about what a good summary is and give kids opportunities to summarize in their discussions. So one strategy is journalist questions. Before students can really be successful with summarizing, they have to be able to categorize information. They've got to know the who, the what, when, where, why, and how. These are questions that we start working on in reading comprehension when they're in 1st and 2nd grade. But it takes on a little different look when we talk about summarizing, because summaries have to include all of those elements. So we want to start having some discussions with kids about how what they already know about questioning can fit into summary writing, the summary writing that we're teaching, and then spend time putting that into writing. Depending on the text that you're using, it's possible that not all of those questions will be answered. So for example, if I'm reading a nonfiction piece about the African savanna, I might not have a who available in that text, or I might not have a why in that text. So as you're scaffolding this for kids, start with a text where all of those things are present, and as kids become more comfortable with identifying that information and writing summaries, move to texts that don't include that information so that they know how to how to deal with when something's missing, because sometimes that takes some time for kids to understand. Another strategy is the one-word summary. So after reading a text, have your students identify one word that most clearly summarizes the reading. And after selecting that word, the students then should write a 2 to 3 sentence explanation of their selection. The power of this strategy is not in the word choice, but in the explanation. We want kids to explain their thinking. And for you as the teacher, this can be very telling. So for instance, if this is an exit strategy out the door, and I'm going to have my kids jot this down on an index card at the end of my class period, if I collect those, I can take a spin through those cards and know exactly what my kids are walking away with and what misconceptions they may have that I need to correct the next day. So that explanation piece is really important because it's going to give you a window into their thinking. A magnet summary is designed to help scaffold students in identifying and expanding on key terms. We want to read a text and identify that key word and then use some class discussion to decide what the supporting details are. We're going to use this strategy with the passage in your handout called Novels Then and Now. And you'll notice at the bottom of your handout, there's a graphic organizer that we're going to fill out as we read. So the first paragraph. Do you like to read novels? Many people do. Would it surprise you to know that novels are a rather new thing? They didn't exist until a few hundred years ago. So if I'm choosing the main idea, just based on that first short paragraph, I'm going to choose novels as my main idea. That's telling me what the rest of that passage is going to be about. Next paragraph. Some people say that the first novel was Cervantes' Don Quixote. This Spanish story of a knight and his servant was written in the early 1600s. The two go from one adventure to another. The book follows their progress. So now I know that I'm expanding this idea about novels, and instead of having a main idea in this paragraph, I've got a supporting idea. So in the first box to the left in that second row, you're going to write down first novel. That's going to go in that first box. Under that, you can add your details. You could draw additional boxes or just put bullets underneath, whatever works for your brain, but add some details about that first novel. You may include things like Don Quixote or 1600s. That might help you give some more depth to that conversation. Beginning with modern, read the next paragraph and we'll add the middle box. Modern novels is what I would choose as the supporting idea in this paragraph. Then underneath, some additional details about modern novels, a continuous story, characters that are realistic, things of that nature, maybe a few examples if I choose. That last box, you kind of have a choice. You could write types of novels, kinds of novels. I would choose to use the word genre. My preference is to use academic language with kids, so my third graders could even tell you what genre meant. So I think it's perfectly appropriate to put genre in that final box, and then you may add additional boxes like historical, detective, or gothic as the types of novels outlined in that paragraph. Another strategy for summarizing is get the gist. But get the gist is an acronym for generating interaction between schemata and text. When we're asking kids to summarize, and when we ourselves are summarizing, we are trying to combine what we already know in our schema or in our background knowledge with what the text is telling us. When we interact those things together, we have a gist or a summary statement. The get the gist strategy uses a certain number of words. Today, I'm going to ask that you use exactly 10 words, no more, no less. You may choose, if the length of your text is longer, to have your students write a 20-word gist, totally teacher discretion. When I introduce this to my third graders, I would absolutely draw out the blanks. For students in 7th and 8th grade, they can handle not having the blanks on the page. So scaffold that however you need to for your students. It is a full statement. It is a sentence. It's not individual words that you're choosing for your 10 words. It is a full and complete sentence. I'm going to ask that you read a note about grammar instruction on page 21 of your Writing Next article. When you finished reading, I want you to compose a summary of exactly 10 words, no more, no less, as your gist. Take just a second to look at these two graphic organizers. Which do you think presents a clearer representation of information? Hopefully you said the graphic on the right. The graphic on the right is a top-down web. The graphic on the left, you'll notice, looks more like a brainstorm web. If we're doing standalone prompt writing, if I'm asking students to write about their Christmas vacation or their favorite teacher or something of that nature, where they're getting to brainstorm their own ideas, that might be what their thinking looks like. It might be spread out with arrows and lots of different bubbles going every which way. However, when we're talking about passage-based writing, passages that kids are reading have a structure. Those passages have a main idea, there are supporting ideas, and there are details. And it's important that kids be able to recognize the structure that's there so that they can use that same type of structure when they start writing, because going back to this idea of making sure that kids are organized in their writing. So as you're selecting graphic organizers for your students to use, keep in mind that a structure in the graphic organizer is going to help them structure their writing. I would also encourage you to choose 2 or 3 graphic organizers that are really powerful tools for your kids. If they have too many to choose from, they're likely not to choose any at all because they don't know which one to use. So give them 1 or 2 that are really helpful to you. I would also encourage you to have conversations in your building vertically. What did 3rd grade do that worked really well for them that 4th grade could build on, and so forth and so on. Because it's going to give you some unity in your building, but it also keeps us from changing the rules on kids all the time. We certainly want to build and expand as kids become more sophisticated readers and writers, but we also don't want to just totally change the rules every time they walk into a classroom. So talk to the teachers in your building and share some of those ideas.